Okay, good evening, folks. We are convening the regular board meeting for the Marin Municipal Water District on the 7th of February. Can I get a roll call or attendance vote?
Good evening. Director Sampson,
Here.
Director Smith,
Here.
Director Russell,
Here.
Vice President Cush,
Here.
and President Schmidt.
Here. Okay. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Terry, do we have any public comment on items on the closed session?
There are none.
Okay. Can I get a roll call vote on the agenda?
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Cush,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay, with that, we're going to convene to closed session and we will return at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you.
It is a separate link, so we'll see you on the other side.
Great, thank you. Hi, folks. Our closed session adjourned at 6:31 p.m. this evening with no reportable actions. So we're moving forward here, and I think we have a, do we have any comments not on the agenda? Nope. On items not on the agenda.
Yes, we have Eric Etlinger, and I just want to remind the public that we have that you have 3 minutes to leave your comment. So, go ahead, Mr. Etlinger, and then after Mr. Etlinger is Matt Circle or Kirkle.
All right, thank you very much. Hi, my name's Eric Etlinger. I've been the Water District's aquatic ecologist for 23 years. For you new members, the district's fisheries department consists of 2 staff and 2 AmeriCorps members, and we're responsible for monitoring salmon and steelhead in the streams that are impacted by the district's water supply operations. One part of the monitoring that we do involves counting juvenile salmon in the late summer. We use a technique called electrofishing, which is basically we isolate sections of stream, a crew of 4 people methodically goes through it, and we are immobilizing and netting fish as we go. At that time of year, our AmeriCorps members aren't working, so for many years now, we have hired a 3-person crew for an 8-week term, and this allows us to do this very technical and very physically demanding work. Last year, a hiring freeze prevented us from bringing on our 8-week crew. So I did my best to pull together a different crew each day. I recruited staff from the district, other public agencies, a local nonprofit, an on-call environmental consultant that the district uses. And I trained a new crew every day, including training on how to work safely in electrified water and how to keep endangered fish alive. I was the only person who knew how to do everything, so the workload was really unmanageable. Despite my best efforts, we were not able to finish the survey, and the data we did collect was, frankly, it was poor quality. So I'm sharing this story with you as just one example of the very technical and important work performed by district staff. Adequate staffing is required if we are to continue to produce the high quality work that regulators and our customers have come to expect. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Matt, please. Matt
Good
Circle.
evening. Good evening, board members. I'm Matt Circle, Senior Park Ranger for the district. This year marks my 28th year as a full-time ranger with the district. In those years, I've seen the ranger program go from 13 authorized positions to just 6. At the same time, I've seen visitation probably more than double and the fire danger dramatically increase. I have to say, based on my years with the district, I believe our current management team for the watershed is the best I've seen. They've managed to get authorization from the board to add 2 much needed ranger positions during this current 2-year budget cycle. However, those positions have been put on hold due to budget constraints. Over the past 20 years, the Watershed Protection Program, the Rangers, have lost 6 full-time positions, including 5 Rangers and 1 Ranger aide. 2 of the Ranger positions were dropped to help pay for the sheriff's contract, and the other positions were lost due to budget cuts. More recently, the district has chosen not to hire a non-benefited 6-month term Ranger aide position that has served the district since 2013 to save money, thus forcing the Rangers to spend much valuable patrol time instead cleaning bathrooms and restrooms instead of patrolling the watershed. These days, it's not uncommon with vacations and training and sick leave and other forms of leave for only 1 Ranger to be on duty to patrol the watershed for extended periods. This includes 20,000 acres, 200 miles of roads and trails, and 7 reservoirs. It should be noted, since 1917, the district has been required to have a patrol function on the watershed as part of its water supply permit because it allows recreation. And per the guidelines, adequate patrol personnel must be provided to supervise and control visitors and to prevent nuisance conditions and unsafe activities. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the district recognized this and determined 8 field rangers plus overhead of our senior ranger, ranger supervisor, and chief ranger were needed to adequately patrol the watershed. Today, this is down to 6. Additionally, due to budget constraints and cuts to the ranger program over the past 20 years, fire apparatus on the watershed has dropped by 36%, and nearly half the rangers' patrol vehicles are 14 years or older. And these are emergency vehicles and fire engines. And due to their use on the watershed, they're worn out and have become mechanically unreliable. These factors heavily impact the district's fire response and readiness. Additionally, 5 of our 6 current rangers are over 50, and considering it takes 6 months to hire a ranger and an additional 2 years and 1,400 hours of training, the district is not prepared for this pending turnover and loss of institutional knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Circle. I'm sorry, but the time is up. Next is Justin T. and then Phil Sauter. Remember, 3 minutes. I apologize. Go ahead, Justin T.
Hi, my name is Justin Turnham. I am an MMWD employee in the Corrosion Control Department. We protect the infrastructure that the Water District installs. Tonight, I would like to speak about how we are responding to rising costs by seeking small short-term savings at the cost of incurring large long-term costs. Our costs are rising by inflation, but also we are uniquely impacted by the increase in paving costs. As an example, I've seen the Corrosion Control Department's annual projects decrease from 3 a year to 1 a year. These 3 projects would help prolong the life of our existing infrastructure, saving the ratepayers expensive replacements costs. Having been an employee for over 17 years, it is hard for me to see the lack of commitment to the long-term health of our infrastructure I've worked so hard to protect. Thank you for your time.
And Mr. Phil Sauter.
Thank you. I wasn't planning to speak, but after listening to Eric Ettlinger's description of the survey this year, I know that Director Russell and Director Sansom and Director Schmidt know this, but I'm not sure if the other directors know that Spawner report that Eric updates several times during the year is something that is really eagerly looked forward to by the Lagunitas Creek Technical Advisory Committee and the many well-connected members, including members from the State Water Board and probably a couple dozen environmental groups. I was really looking forward to seeing that report, given the rains we've had, and it's a real disappointment that the resources aren't there for that. knowing Eric for many years, my guess is he's going to pull out some useful information to help us. But just any help that we can give to keep that information flowing, I think would be really good for the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, we have directors and general managers announcements. I'll go through the directors, and if you folks have anything to share, start with Jed.
Great. We had a Finance Administration Committee meeting on Thursday, and I have nothing to report from that. Thursday the 26th, I believe. Is that right, Terry? And I also want to report that I went to the WAC meeting, my first WAC meeting as representative for Marin. And it was an informative discussion and report with all the Sonoma master contract partners and other agencies in the area, and a crowd of maybe 30 or 40 people. And I was cold called, of course, by Grant, having met him, saying, "Hey, Jed, what do you guys want to do at Marin?" What I said is I wanted to build an increased, robust relationship. We have a great one that's gone on for decades, and I think we can do more together. And they're interested in partnering with us, and they're interested in thinking how we can dig deeper on the relationship. And I think they're looking for staff to connect with their staff with some proposals about how we can further build that relationship. And I would encourage us to put our minds together to think about what we can do. I would be supportive in pushing that relationship in as positive way as possible, so that we can provide a regional support for this important relationship and go even beyond what we have done now in terms of helping work with them.
Thank you, Jed. Larry, then Ranjiv.
I have nothing.
Okay, thank you. Ranjiv?
Yeah, last Friday was the monthly meeting for the North Bay Watershed Association, and Larry and I both attended that. Larry as our representative on the board of directors, and myself as an alternate. And the main topic that was presented is a water resilience study that is being conducted by Sonoma Water. Actually, it's contracted out to Jacobs Engineering, and Armin Manever is leading that work. And so he was the key presenter during the session. And obviously so much overlap between the issues that they're facing and what we're also considering here in Marin. And that was highlighted multiple times during the presentation. I hope that we can bring to you a full summary of that resilience study when it is completed. I can't remember the timeline, but hopefully not too long. And as Jed is noting, I hope that the study from Sonoma Water that parallels what we're looking at with respect to our strategic water supply assessment strengthens opportunities for working together, and highlights those opportunities for us. So stay tuned. More to report on that.
Thank you, Ranjiv. Matt?
Yep, thanks, Monty. I spent January kind of getting a better look under the hood for all the great work that Sean and his crew are doing on the watershed, and was fortunate enough to participate in the first field trip in almost 2 years by the Lagunitas Technical Advisory Committee, led by Sarah Phillips and then Rob Carson. We got a great tour of Lagunitas Creek and all the really good work that's going into rebuilding the fish habitats there, and got to spend some time with Eric and then Jason to see what they're doing in their projects. And it's really incredibly interesting stuff. And we're very lucky to have their expertise and partner as we redesign the creek to what it used to be to really start, I guess, motivating this fish spawning. And then was able to get my hands dirty a little bit with a broom pole in the watershed. Thanks Suzanne out there for organizing that, and the Grizzly Fellows and the One Tam folks. And then lastly, participated in the One TAM kickoff for their 10-year strategic plan for that group, and saw how well we're being represented by Sean on that, and then Matt Seges as well, and really making sure that we're a partner, and at the same time our needs are getting met too as we weave that balance over the next 10-year plan. But I think, collectively out of those three, what I like, the common theme is there's a lot of work to be done on the watershed, and really looking to make sure we can make the investments as we move in this budget cycle to get us into a little bit healthier place, and a place where we can start building and keeping it as pristine as it is. So, end of report.
Great, thank you. I'll just quickly just add a mention about our annual board planning retreat last week, which was, again, just to say thank you to all the staff that did an incredible amount of work to pull together really great presentations, very concise, a lot of information, just an incredible coverage of all the things that we are managing as a district and the complexities and the goals and objectives that we have for the coming year. Really inspiring, and I really appreciate the effort that went into that. So thank you. Ben, do you have anything?
I don't, President Schmidt, but I just follow up on your comment noting that the video of that retreat is now posted on our website for anyone who's interested to review it.
And all of the presentations from that day are also posted online now too.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to our next item, which is the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, do we have any comments?
There are none.
Can I get a vote then?
Yes. Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay, that moves us on to agenda item number 6 in our calendar here, which is for Quintel Management Consulting contracts. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Regular, this is up to our rate setting process update. Sorry, it's an informational item.
President Schmidt, I was going to kick this off with some comments before I hand it off to our Finance Director, Brett Oppendahl. For the past 110 years, Marin Water has provided clean, safe, and reliable water to our customers 24/7, 365 days a year. Over the past few years, we've had some extraordinary events, and we're able to meet the challenges they presented. From the public safety power shutoff events where PG&E turned off all power supply to our facilities for multiple days. It's never occurred in our history. We're able to work through that. A pandemic where most people were able to shelter at home, and our staff came in, did the work, kept the water running day after day. And of course, the recent historic drought. Today, we find ourselves at an inflection point. As you'll hear the upcoming presentation, due to several factors, we'll be asking our customers for additional revenue to simply bring us back to our baseline budget, allowing us to fill critical positions we've left vacant. We heard some comments from staff tonight, and to meet all of our obligations as a water district. We also have some exciting opportunities to place us on a trajectory for long-term resiliency and sustainability. As I think about sustainability and resiliency for this water district, I think to me, it means water supply resiliency, even in the face of extreme droughts that are projected to increase in time. It means investment in our aging infrastructure to maintain our commitment to deliver the water whenever our customers may need it. And it means continuing to embrace our commitment to the special watershed in which we were entrusted, continuing to enhance our activities in fuel reduction to protect the watershed and the surrounding communities. Continued preservation of the rich biodiversity of the watershed that protects the high quality of water provided by the mountain streams and their natural systems. Since 1912, Marin Water has reliably delivered water for our customers, overcoming many obstacles along the way. We tunneled through Pine Mountain. We erected Alpine Dam, built among the first recycling programs in the state, and partnered with our customers to develop an industry-leading water conservation program. We're very proud to be California's oldest municipal water district. We're proud to have overcome so many previous challenges. We're also humbled to say that none of these accomplishments would have been possible without our customers, who have always been very engaged and strong supporters of this district. Our customer sacrifice during the district's most recent water shortage emergency, the drought we all went through, cutting their water use by 25% in an incredible display of community. Thank you. Now we're seeking similar support that will help us maintain core services and provide you with the expanded level of service and long-term resiliency you have asked for. As I think about this inflection point we're at, I know two things. One, that the district will face more challenges ahead, whether from climate change, natural disasters, or other external events. And second, I know with our customers' support, we'll be ready to meet these challenges and embrace all the opportunities that lie ahead for us. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Brett.
Thank you, Ben. Good evening, directors. My name is Brett Uppendahl. I'm the district's finance director. Today, I'll be going through quite a few slides here that really kind of wrap up where we've been over the last few months as we've undertaken this rate setting update for many of the reasons General Manager Hornstein reviewed in the last few minutes. Overall, the presentation today will cover the topics you see on your screen. We'll talk a little bit about Marin Water's overall service network. We'll talk about the rate setting process, highlight some challenges and opportunities that we do face over the next few months and in this next rate cycle. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about our current rate structure, and we'll start to talk about a preview of our proposed rate plan options and what those impacts would be. And finally, we'll review our cost management efforts and our customer assistance programs, and we'll wrap up with a summary of the benefits and the next steps. And before I get too far into this, I did want to remind the board and also the public that we have been discussing this for the better part of the last 2 months. It's indicated by the meeting kind of summaries you see in front of you, ranging from special meetings in early December to more technical discussions at the Operations Committee and Finance Committee. And then we also came back to the board here in early January to talk about reserves and kind of our rate history. And then we also had a discussion just a few days ago on January 26th, where we took another deeper dive into our CIP planning process and followed up on some rate setting and reserve targets discussion. So the presentation I'm giving today will be a combination of all the ones you've seen before, as well as a little bit of new content. And this is all as we continue to investigate and kind of work through our options and try to provide as much information as we can to you and to the public. So we'll start here with just an overview of Marin Water. And as Ben mentioned, we have a very long history and something to very much be proud of here at the district. We are the longest running municipal water district here in California, as we were established in 1912. Our mission here at the district is to manage our natural resources in a sustainable manner and provide reliable, high quality drinking water at a reasonable price. We serve 147 square mile service area that covers central and north and southern Marin, basically all of Marin County except for Novato and West Marin. We serve 191,000 people or so, and we deliver about 8 billion gallons of water each year. And I think it's important to note that as a public agency, the district does not make a profit. By law, we only charge customers the cost of providing a reliable, high quality drinking water. So trying to summarize all of the infrastructure that we do have here, all of what it takes to provide water, clean, reliable water 24/7. We have this graphic here that has been used in the last few years, but I think it's important to kind of go back and just gain an appreciation for what it takes to provide that water here locally in Marin. So 22,000 acres of watershed, 3 treatment plants, 7 reservoirs, over 900 miles of pipe, nearly 100 pump stations and storage tanks, staff that conducts over 100,000 water quality tests per year, We have 243 staff in the budget, and we have 62,000 meters, which is also to say we have 62,000 customers, each of which we interact with on a daily basis. So a long way of saying it takes more than just pumps and pipes to deliver water to our customers. We have 24/7 operations that include water treatment to clean the water and distribute it through all the network of pipes. That also entails emergency leak response. So we can get out there and get our leaks plugged as soon as possible. And then we also have a watershed to manage, land management out there, which includes wildfire resiliency, vegetation management, forest restoration, as well as just ongoing maintenance improvements. Our water system care and improvement is a lot of ongoing maintenance, again, and infrastructure to maintain that and keep it functional 24/7 or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we also maintain a customer service department where we manage bills and customer assistance. And we also have special programs and outreach that we conduct here at the district. So when we talk about water 24/7, these are some of the things that come to mind. The far left of your screen there is a picture of our water treatment facilities in the process of cleaning water from the watershed and providing it to the network of distribution pipes. As noted in the middle there, as an aging agency, we do have quite a bit of old infrastructure in the ground. And so our average pipeline age is about 50 years old, as we've talked about in many of our capital planning meetings. And so, with that comes natural breaks and leaks. And so our team of emergency crews can often be found responding to leaks and water main breaks at any hour of the day, any day of the year. And then in general, on the right-hand side, when we do have water main breaks, they will cause collateral damage. And so not only do we have to fix the pipe, but we have to clear the debris around it and any infrastructure damage that it causes associated. So not without its challenge. And like I said, that's kind of a byproduct of having an old infrastructure system underneath the ground where all of us work and play each day. Watershed land management is obviously a big part of the operations, as that is one of the biggest pieces of our overall infrastructure and the main source for over 75% of our water, as we'll talk about. So, fire prevention on the left there, pile burning like this one here on Sky Oaks Road, the safe, cost-effective way to reduce our fuel loads. The Azalea Hill Trail project we mentioned in a few meetings that really improves access and control and removes any non-system roads and trails to protect our sensitive habitats out there. And we also work closely with our partner agencies and volunteers, as it shows on the right there. We remove invasive plants, reduce fuel loads, and help native species thrive in the watershed. And when we talk about capital improvements, and we could go on for a whole hour just on capital improvements in general, but really what we're talking about is three core types of projects. So ongoing and kind of in specific nature, but the types of projects that we do include renewal and replacement, system improvements to try to gain efficiencies and meet best practice standards, and also just to make sure we have water supply reliability. That's more of a forward-looking new project that we talk about in terms of enhancing our overall water supply. And the reason why this slide is here for us today is we track this all in one website online. It's shown there, marinwater.org/CIP. Interactive map. You can check the progress of projects both from your phone or computer. And there's a really good way of kind of connecting with the projects you see around you as you move and drive and walk throughout Marin. A few examples of recently completed projects that you have seen. On the top left there, culvert replacements in the watershed. On the bottom left there, structural spillway repairs at the Nicasio Reservoir. The Castagna pump station has been talked about a lot, and that's the way we've increased our capacity to pull water from the north, from Sonoma. The top right of your screen there shows the East Blythedale pipeline replacement, and our crews down underneath there fixing the pipes there. And then also we have recently installed emergency generators or a treatment plant to make us more resilient during either PSPS or any other kind of power loss. Out in the watershed where our treatment plants are. And so that really helps us make sure we can keep the lights on and keep running regardless of what's going on around us. Again, 24/7, that's kind of the theme here. So that's kind of an overview of Marin and our service area, Marin Water and our service area. So as we get into rate setting, I think we'll talk a little bit about the process here at the beginning, because I know it can be a little bit of a difficult process from the outside in to understand how we're moving and when we make our decisions. So I think the first question as we get into this is, why is a rate increase needed for Marin Water, right? Why are we even talking about this? So there are four pretty basic reasons. There's a lot of complicated reasons underneath this, but there's some four pretty basic reasons that are the reason why we are talking to the board and the public about this now. Number one, we need to keep pace with rising costs of operating expenses, right? Inflation is affecting all of us. Marine water is not immune, and as I'll show in a few slides here, in fact, we actually see some of the worst, kind of sides of inflation because of some of the core operations that we have are more highly impacted by inflationary measures. In the middle there, it's been obviously a topic of conversation for the past couple of years. And I think if you know enough about Marin's history, you look back and you see it's been 30 or 40 or maybe 50 years of talking about this, if not more, but improving our water supply reliability, right? We're going to have, climate change, we're going to have our cycles of weather. And so how do we improve the reliability of our water supply in the face of extreme droughts? How do we also just continue to make our wildfire resiliency efforts take hold in the Mount Tam watershed? I had a few slides there earlier showing some of that kind of work, and that's not inexpensive work, and it's work that we need to keep on doing, so we need to keep on funding it. And then finally, on the far right, reserves. We were fortunate to have reserves, as I'll show you in a few slides. We used them during the drought, and so now it's time to start replenishing those reserves so we can remain prepared for any future uncertainties. And so, big picture wise, these are the four core reasons why we need to consider rate increases on a periodic basis. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail as I make my way through the presentation today. The rate setting process, again, there's a lot more kind of detail behind this, but there's two basic parts of the rate setting process. First, we're required to conduct a cost of service analysis. That's just kind of a basic way of saying we need to take a look at our organization, analyze all the costs, analyze what it might cost to keep running us at least for the next 4 years, and if not longer, and really map those out and do the full thorough check on all of those. And that includes incorporating recent trends, looking at our rate structure, how we're making our revenue. And then when we talk about revenue requirement, which is really the kind of core here, what revenue is required to maintain our operations, we're looking to see how much is our operations and maintenance costs, what kind of capital improvements we need to fund, what types of water supply enhancement projects can we undertake in the next couple of years, and then how can we best become fiscally sustainable to withstand any uncertainties. And then after in coordination with that, with our investigation and our analysis, we also need to make sure we're doing a public outreach and engagement. And so that takes many forms as we try to meet customers and the public where they're at. And so that includes board meetings like tonight, customer workshops, as I'll talk about later. We're going to be starting later this week and into next week. We're constantly sending updates through our website and through bill inserts, as well as our district e-news that you can subscribe to, news releases and in partnership with local media, social media as well. And then we also do send out direct mail written notices, and we will conduct, at the end of all this, the final requirement is we conduct a public hearing. So cost of service analysis, that was on the left-hand frame of the screen before. So what does that really mean, right? And as I mentioned a few parts of it in the previous slide, but this is a little bit more kind of in depth in terms of the step-by-step approach. The first step is taking a review of the policies that we have on the books and our current rate structure. And then we take a look at the demand projections. We take a look at the last few years and where we think demand may be in terms of overall water consumption. And then, as I mentioned, we really take a look at the revenue requirement required to fund ongoing operations and any future enhancements. And then we look at how to best allocate that proportionally throughout all of our customers. And that's called the rate design. And so, as the graphic shows there at the bottom, those are the two steps we're in. We're kind of trying to finalize our revenue requirement over the next few weeks and trying to translate that into a rate design that is fair, equitable, and proportional. And this graphic I've used in the past, and so I won't read every word here that you see in front of you, but it essentially kind of is a graphical way of showing that there's a lot that goes into the water rate structure, right? We have to take all these factors into consideration, both over the short term and long term, and really find that right balance. And how does that get expressed through the rate structure that each of us pay through our water on a bi-monthly basis? And then this slide, I've included this here today just for context. And so I've included this in the past, but I think it's important to remember as we start to throw around, thousands of dollars and millions of dollars and how that all relates. I think it's just good to have this kind of core context with how does that relate to our current, budget structure. So as it says on the top there, our budget is $116 million right now. And that includes all funds, meaning operations and capital. We do have a 2-year budget cycle. And I would just remind the board and the public that our budget cycle, is kind of a continuous evolution on a prior year planning efforts, right? So we kind of have this natural, planning cycle where a 2-year budget, typically about a 4-year rate cycle, and then we like to take that longer 10-year view, and sometimes even longer, to make sure we're kind of making our way towards the long-term goals. But it really does require us, the budget cycle and the rate cycle, to kind of really check in and reevaluate along the way. So Again, $116 million budget, 2-year budget cycle. If you break that down in the next section there, our expenditures are about 70% of our 70% of our expenditures, I should say, are for ongoing operations, and about 30% of our expenses are for capital projects and debt service. On the revenue side, we get about half of our revenue from variable water sales, meaning how much customers use. We pay kind of per unit prices there. We get about 45% of our revenue from fixed fee service charges. And then we do get about 5% of revenue from non-rate sources, such as connection fees, permits, and rents. Okay, so the next section here is challenges and opportunities. And this is one of the longer sections, as we do have our fair share of both, challenges and opportunities, headed our way over the next few years. And so I'll kind of go through them one by one, but just to generally summarize what I'm going to say in the next 5 to 10 slides. These are the initial findings as we've looked at it through the eyes of the cost of service analysis, right? So again, we look at our trends, look at our policies, where are we at? And so I think within each of these is probably challenges and opportunities, right? But as I listen down the screen here, number one, we're looking at water consumption as it's well below long-term averages. And I think, there's a lot of reasons for that, a lot of really good reasons for that, as Director Hornstein mentioned. I think it was a community effort. I think we owe our gratitude to our customers for helping us get through the drought. I also think that, there's some cost effectiveness to that too, as we all know that, conservation is probably one of the more cost-effective ways to enhance our water supply. So, I think we look at it, from a financial perspective, and we say we just need to, change our rate structure to adapt to those current, consumption patterns. So from my perspective and from perspective of the analysts that we're looking at this, we're expecting that trend to continue for throughout the next rate cycle, right? No one has a crystal ball. We don't know exactly how our customers are going to be using water over the long term, but we do expect this kind of lower than average trend to continue throughout the next rate setting cycle, which is 4 years. We also know from looking at our current budget and actuals that we have an ongoing baseline budget shortfall of about 30 million. And so when I say baseline budget, so I'll say it quite a bit tonight, what I'm talking about is the service levels and kind of the staffing expectations, or I should say staffing levels and service expectations that were established over the last couple of budget cycles, right? As I mentioned, we build upon prior planning efforts. We don't just kind of start from scratch each year. So we've got a long history of partnership with the community here. And I think we've got a pretty good idea of what it takes just to kind of keep the lights on and keep operations running. And so just to do that, we're looking at about a $30 million budget shortfall. And again, that indicates that our rate structure does not align with our current demand patterns. It also reflects the fact that we're facing some inflationary pressures. The third bullet down there, water supply enhancement projects. So those were not included in the prior budget or rate cycle, and so those do require additional funding, right? I think the board has been in many discussions about, what level to invest in and which projects. And so, from a financial planning perspective, a couple of steps away from that, we just know that there is no funding in the current budget for that or the current rate structure. And so if we're going to go down that path, whether for short-term projects or for the long-term plan, we're going to have to generate some extra revenue in order to address the water supply enhancement initiatives. Fourth one down there, capital investments. Those have been a priority of the district for the last number of years. They continue to be a high priority. Our infrastructure is not getting any younger. It is only getting older. And as I think our capital team has shown, even if we start really accelerating our work now on it, I think we'd still expect to fall a little farther behind the curve over the next few years as we have this cycle of old infrastructure that just needs to be kind of worked through and repaired. And you can't do it all in 1 year. And like I said, it keeps getting older every day. So we do have an opportunity here to use bond funding to address critical needs in the short term, but we also need to think about how we invest in terms of what our long-term new baseline may be to not fall too far behind in terms of deferred maintenance. And then finally at the bottom, like I said before, none of us have a crystal ball. I think we know from experience here that climate change is likely to continue. We're likely to see more droughts in the future, not less. I think economic impacts are always going to be out there, and whether those are supply chain issues or just kind of common inflation. I think we are an actor in the system in terms of the overall economy, and we could probably make the same case for climate change. We can't control much of it, but we do have to make sure we plan to be able to continue to provide high quality water 24/7, regardless of climate change, drought, economic cycles, and/or any inflation coming our way. So those are the kind of the 5 big initial findings from the cost of service analysis. What does that mean in terms of dollars? Well, it means a financial challenge, as it says on the top there, right? So it's our first challenge we have in front of us is a financial challenge. We've got some budgetary shortfalls. You've heard me mention, about a $30 million operating increase. The slide here provides more of a range, right? I mean, there's always a range when you come to financial forecasting. And some of these are capital, some are operating, you know, some are must-haves, some are a little bit, you know, in terms of that enhancement or increased service level. So, you know, as you read down the list here, you know, customer demand at the top there is clearly the biggest number. And so what that means is, you know, our rate structure again, you know, needs to adapt to really kind of better reflect, you know, how our customers are conserving and how we get our revenues from, you know, from a rate structure. And so that's $12 to $14 million of the overall deficit. We know that inflation, you know, even if it starts to moderate here in the next couple, you know, weeks and months, we still have the last year or two of inflation to catch up to, in the sense of prices aren't going down, and they may start to flatten a little bit, but they're not going down. So we expect inflation to continue to impact our core expenditure areas to the tune of $5 to $8 million. We would like to move forward on the water supply roadmap. And so, you know, at a minimum, I think that's going to cost us about $2 million to continue our studies and kind of some of those really low hanging fruit type things. And then at the higher end, at least in the next 4 years, that could be upwards of $9 million per year as we start to make headway towards some of those projects. As I mentioned, reserves have been utilized and need to be replenished. We can talk about, you know, a little bit more specifics about how quickly to replenish those. That's more of a technical probably question. Investments in our critical infrastructure, I think those are clearly needed in some key areas I'll talk about later. But again, the pace to which we start to affect those and how we affect those can be more of a range. And finally, service level enhancements, right? And so as I'll show here later, you know, we have not changed the overall staffing pattern here at the district in the last few years, even though the world around us has changed, even though we do have needs in certain areas. And I think, you know, definitely there's some areas we'd like to be able to expand and provide better service to the customers or provide better, you know, operational efficiencies, you know, kind of adapt to best practices. There's a lot of opportunities there. So again, a range of $1 to $2 million in terms of service level enhancements in a targeted way across the organization. So adding this up, you get a range from about $26 million in the short end to $42 million on the higher end. Mentioned a few times here that the next challenge we're facing going forward is just adapting our rate structure to consumption trends. And so, as I've said, we've, you know, had some really remarkable conservation efforts by our community here, as noted in the arrow on the right-hand side. We had a 22% reduction in fiscal year 22. You know, as I look at this from kind of a financial planning, you know, trend, you see that the dark dotted lines going straight across is the 20-year average. There's not much here to indicate to me in the next 4 years that we go back above that average, right? I think we're going to stay below that average the next 3 or 4 years. Again, no crystal ball here. I think it's just looking at the way customers are using water, looking at the recent rains. I think we probably will have some sort of a, you know, a bounce back, as it's indicated by the little bit of growing, you know, bars on the far right-hand side. But if you generally look at the patterns over here, you know, highs are lower, lows are lower. So we will have to really kind of reevaluate once we get out of this next couple of years and take a harder look at how that, you know, projects over the long term. But at least in this 4-year period, as we set rates around this, I think it's more prudent to be on the more conservative side and to assume, you know, a slight bounce back, but really, you know, nothing returning to a prior year long-term average. Another challenge we face is really just the nature of, you know, running a utility here. And so, you know, as the slide says, financial challenge, fixed expenses versus variable revenues. I think, you know, we're not the only ones in this boat, right? I think, you know, we may have higher fixed costs than some other water providers because we have, you know, costs like water treatment plants in the watershed, as we'll talk about. However, it's not a unique phenomenon. It's just a kind of a fact of the matter. You know, when you run a utility, you're going to have a high level of fixed costs. And this slide indicates our fixed costs are about 95%, meaning that regardless of how much water we use, and we still have to do all those, you know, activities I talked about at the beginning in terms of watershed maintenance, in terms of water treatment, water quality tests. You know, we still have to send out the same amount of bills. We still need to answer the same amount of phone calls. It doesn't matter how much water is being used. So most of our expenses are fixed. We do have some that vary with water use, you know, a little bit of electricity costs as we pump less water through the system, a little bit less chemical costs. You know, we may not have to treat as much water each year, but for the most part, our expenses are largely fixed. In contrast, on the right-hand side, most of our revenues are variable. At least half of them are, as it shows there. So half the revenues depend largely, if not fully, on how much water is being used by our customers, while about only 46% are fixed. So, you know, in times where, you know, consumption or demand stays relatively flat, you know, this isn't a problem because the rate structure that we choose will essentially, you know, capture enough revenue to maintain your expenses. However, as I showed on the prior slide, when you have a significant reduction, 22% reduction, it's going to cause us to have to change something, right? No organization can survive a 20% change in your revenue source without making some sort of a change either on the expense side or to the overall kind of price of the products that you're essentially distributing. So this just gets to that core issue that for us as a utility, we're always going to have a financial challenge of having fixed expenses and a variable revenue model. Another financial challenge we face is inflationary pressure. So I mentioned this a few times, in my lead up to this. I think it's pretty clear as most of us go through our daily life, things are more expensive as we go to the store and as we, try to live our, day-to-day lives. The charts here probably don't surprise anybody. The one on the far left there is Bay Area inflation for all items. CPI is a common measure of inflation. So CPI for all items up 6.8% as it was last year. Here at the district, we don't buy all items, right? We have an operation that we do that's pretty, pretty standard in terms of the big expenses. And so the three biggest ones are in front of you there: fuel and utilities in the middle, electricity towards the right, and construction costs on the left and the far right. So, those three areas we've seen, at least on a CPI indicator, which is what I'm showing you here as we look into, the kind of Bay Area wide inflation rates, we're seeing double digits and upwards of 20% in electricity costs. And so again, like all of our customers at home, we're seeing this hit our budget, and we're not immune to this. We can't just ignore this. We have to actually pay our bills as well. Construction costs there on the right, those are a different measure. Those come from something called the Engineering News Review Index for Bay Area construction costs. But as I've talked about a little before, a big part of our operation is actually doing construction out there and bidding out big, large projects. And so we're seeing a 15% increase coming on all those capital projects that we're doing. So it's not insignificant by any means. And then in as much as, kind of high level data might show that we have inflation, I think it's probably just as important to look at what's actually happening to us on the ground, right? When we look at our actual expenses, are we seeing that same, price increase, make its way through to our expense ledger? And the answer is yes, right? And so the examples on the screen here are just a few examples, as it would indicate. It doesn't cover everything, but these are some of the ones that really catch my attention and really, make a difference to the bottom line. So top one there, purchased water from Sonoma. I'll talk about in a few minutes, but that's about 25% of our overall water supply. So they're telling us that we should be expecting at least a 10% per year increase in the base rate. So that doesn't count any bringing more water in from Sonoma. If we just do our contractual minimum, we can expect upwards of 10% per year over the next 4 years in just the overall cost of Sonoma imported water. Paving contracts, we talked about the board retreat last week, but costs for those have more than doubled since 2020. And that is not an insignificant number. I think our baseline is something near $1.5 million. And so we're now paying over $3 million a year just for paving projects. And those are the same projects we did, every year in this district's history. The change there is that the local jurisdiction requirements for us to repair streets after our pipeline projects has dramatically increased, meaning that we used to be able to, pave small patches or, relatively straightforward, cover up the damage we do to the pavement. But just since I think it was 2017, we've seen jurisdictional requirements make us have to pave longer down the street and wider, and in some cases from curb to curb. And so that's just skyrocketing our overall costs to have to repave after we do pipeline projects. Water treatment chemicals. I would say, we're a part of a Bay Area collective, and so we get group pricing as it comes to chemicals. We're not the only agency that needs to procure these, for water treatment purposes. And despite that kind of, group share pricing that we do get, we saw a 20% increase in the unit cost. So the per unit cost of each chemical that we buy, on average, I should say, was up 20% just in the last bidding cycle. Similarly, in terms of welded steel pipe, we have to procure that from the global market for steel. So from 2020 to 2022, we actually saw a 17% per year increase. So over 3 years, that's well over 30% in terms of just the core input price for steel pipe. Water meters, similarly, they're in everyone's house or business or property. We have them down there. They're basic analog meters, but prices for those are up over 60% just since last year, just for the basic analog meters. We're not even talking increasing for better technology or for AMI or for kind of less manual reads. We're talking about just the old analog meters that are in the ground and have been there forever. 60% cost increase for basic analog meters. And then finally, as we exist here in California, in the Bay Area, Our insurance premiums have risen over 50% since 2021, largely due to just increased statewide wildfire risk and the overall litigation trend. So, we've obviously had our fair share of experience here in the North Bay fires, and so we're grouped into that area as being a high fire risk. So we saw a 50% cost increase since 2021 on our current rates. And we have yet to talk to our insurance brokers about what the rates will be next year, but I don't think they're going down anytime soon. So those will continue to drive us not only now, but over the next 4 years. So what does that all mean? Obviously not good news for the overall operating budget. So what you see in front of you here is, a financial forecast for showing, if we just keep our current rates, what does that do to the overall budget? And again, it's pretty clear, not good, right? We're currently operating on the far left there below break even. And that's kind of a nice way of saying we're losing money every month, right? We're operating at a deficit, we're relying on reserves. We are offsetting that by, holding positions vacant and deferring some capital projects. Obviously, those are not sustainable and not great long-term strategies, but we're doing what we can to kind of mitigate the impact on our reserves. And as this shows here, expenses will continue to rise. And so the bars get bigger over the next 4 years, reaching an ongoing deficit of $45 million by 2027 if we don't change our rates. And so again, if you have increasing expenses and flat revenues because of our current rate structure, you're going to get a shape like this. And it just happens to be big numbers because we're seeing a lot of inflationary impacts, as I talked about. And then overall, our rate structure was set during expectations and we had much higher overall demand. So the challenge that leads us to in this slide is that we have to replenish our reserves, right? So another fiscal challenge we face is not only just plug in the budget so we stop losing money, but it would be to actually start rebuilding our reserves. And as anybody knows, the reserves are there to use them when you need them. They're also, best practice would be to refill them when you have the opportunity, right? So we did have well-funded reserves in 2021, and we had a couple of meetings on this kind of talking about the detail, but as you can see in 2021, we had about $63 million in discretionary reserves. That was considered pretty well-funded for a district like ourselves. And over the last 2 years, we had to use those reserves, both to offset revenue losses from the drought, as well as to secure additional water supply in the meantime, and specifically, importing more water from Sonoma. So over 2 years, we used about $35 million of those reserves. Again, that's the intent of reserves, is to use them when you need them. And then now it would be the time to start considering how to start building those back so that we can be ready for the next economic cycle or the next drought or the next unanticipated expense. So these next two slides are a little bit of a change up here. And what I wanted to put these here for is because I think, if I was a member of the public or, as I am a customer here, as I look at this, I would say, well, what are you guys doing? How'd you get into a $30 million hole, right? And so we look back at that. We said, was it a rise in our operating budget? And the answer is pretty much no, right? As you look here, if you track back our operating budget over the last 10 years or so, what you see is a pretty steady increase of about 4% per year. It's some years a little higher, some years a little lower, but I think district management did a great job over the last 12 years of really containing costs, right? Not letting the cost pressures that I just mentioned, necessarily make their way into the rate cycle, right? It was the goal of the district to maintain a pretty steady budget, and we did that through a variety of actions. And so that resulted in, like I said, a pretty steady increase, 4% per year, very kind of tied to what inflation has been here in the Bay Area. And so, not much to see. So it wasn't necessarily just a growth in the budget. And then the next thing you look to is the biggest piece of the budget, right? Our staffing. And so, did we have a big increase in staffing? Did we expand our services? And again, the answer is no. And in fact, the opposite, right? We had about 260 staff, back in the 2012-13 range. We actually had to cut staff in order to make that overall budget, essentially flat or, kind of remain in a nice tight range. We had to actually cut, 10% or so of our staff, 8% of our staff. There were vacant positions, so it wasn't layoff, but it was nice. It was the decision of the district to use that as a cost-cutting mechanism or to kind of keep costs under control over the last 10 or 12 years. And so again, the most of the cuts happened 10 years ago or so, but you can see here none of them have really been added back, right? I think we've added one ranger. You can see 242 to 243 the last couple of years, and that's about it. So we have not necessarily invested in our organization to be able to be more responsive or adaptive, to the conditions on the ground that we see. We just maintain a pretty flat staffing level. Excuse me. So that brings me to my next set of challenges here, and these kind of start to go away a little bit away from the financial nuts and bolts, right? And so less numbers on here, more kind of concepts that we may be able to understand together. And this basically is just 4 or 5 ways of saying Marin water is very unique. And I think, again, General Manager Hornstein, I mentioned our long history and a lot of the opportunities we have to change the trajectory going forward. I think when I look at this, I just look at, there's a lot of reasons here why it's difficult to compare us to other organizations, other agencies. It's hard to just say you should, act like a business or you should be like other governments, because we're not that, right? We're a municipal utility. We're not a business. We can't run a profit, can't shed unprofitable, aspects of our organization. We can't just on a whim, change our prices, right? We are a utility that's bound by, quite a few laws and regulations, and we owe it to our customer base, and it's in our charter to provide our water, each and every day to every customer who needs it, right? So we're not a business, we're not a government, right? We don't get tax funding, we don't get sales tax, we don't get property tax. We don't have this kind of large mandate, or we don't have any, at the county you have, state mandates. At cities you have very prescribed rules. I would also say that cities and towns and counties have a little bit more discretion over their revenues, right? When you do pull that kind of tax revenue in, you can have more choices of what you do with it. But I think, as we'll talk about here, in the next few slides, a lot of what we bring in via rate revenues can only be spent, on rate supported activities. So we're not a government. We're also not a nonprofit. I think in many ways we probably have similar characteristics to each of those, to a business, to a government, or to a nonprofit. But at the end of the day, we're not those. We're unique. We're a municipal utility. We also exist in California that is unique. In particular, as we talked today, Prop 218 is a very unique, voter approved proposition that guides the rate setting process and eventually guides how we can spend the funds. And then, as I mentioned on the last slide under the insurance topic, climate change drives a much higher risk here of drought and wildfire just at a baseline than you would see maybe in other water agencies across the country. Even within California, Marin County is unique, right? We have a very unique topography. We have lots of hills. We don't have a lot of flat track homes and areas where you get kind of more economies of scale. And so when we have a topography like Marin that's beautiful and that we all enjoy, it also requires more infrastructure to pump the water up and over the hills and into the next set of developments. We have a low population density in that second bullet there. That means we don't get the economies of scale that you get in the Central Valley, or you get other places where you can have just long, straight, narrow areas to pump your water, right? We're really kind of pumping it here and pumping it there, and we don't get that economies of scale where we can take advantage of kind of the numbers as it would go. And then also slow growth, right? Marin County is known for slow growth. We don't have population expansions. We don't have a big commercial sector, as you may see in the East Bay or you may see in the South Bay. And so our smaller population base, basically from a mathematical perspective, means we have less kind of a denominator to share the costs, right? We have to kind of bear more of the costs ourselves, and we don't have that bigger population with which to kind of divide the costs out. It also means we don't get as much, benefit from connection fees, from the new developments and from the bigger, commercial activities. We don't get that benefit over time, and so we're really kind of, on our own kind of core population and infrastructure, base with which to make the decisions going forward, for better or for worse. And then finally, Marin Water, even within California, even within the utility business, even within Marin County, we are the oldest water district, municipal water district in California. That means we have a lot of old infrastructure, as I mentioned. We have our own watershed and water treatment operations. Those, come with a cost as well. And then, unlike many other Bay Area water suppliers, the bottom note shows there, Marin does not rely on water from the Sierras or from the State Water Project. And I'll talk here in a minute about why that makes a big difference. As I've kind of alluded to a few times here, we get our water locally sourced here in Marin. The graphic there shows the Mount Tam watershed, as well as Sulihuli and Nicasio. Combined, we have about 80,000 acre feet of storage from those facilities. That usually accounts for about 75% of our overall water. As you can kind of see the pipeline going up north there, 25% of our water typically is imported from the Russian River, so our neighbors to the north. I think Director Smith mentioned our partnership with Santa Rosa and Sonoma up there, so another vital part of our organization. And I think it's great that we can get that from our neighbor up north here on our side of the bay. You contrast that to where does the rest of the Bay Area get their water from, right? And so what you're seeing here is not only much larger facilities. If you look at Shasta and Oroville, $3 and $4 million respectively, or 3 and 4 million acre feet respectively of capacity. You look at McCollum and Hetch Hetchy, another 1 million acre feet, coming out of the Sierras there. And then you look a little bit more to the south and you see the San Luis Reservoir. And so the idea here is that, all of these water sources, as the lines show, not only come with likely heavily subsidized state and federal funding from over the years, they also have much larger population bases with which to kind of pass the costs on over time. And so they have their own set of challenges, and not to say that it's easy doing what they do. It's just a different dynamic that we have here in Marin, when we're not pumping water from halfway across the state and sharing the costs with the state and federal government and with a higher population base. So that leads us to, again, kind of pulling that back together, an infrastructure challenge, right? So we're still on the topic of challenges. What are we facing when we look at raising rates to fund the operation? So what this slide shows, and I think it shows it pretty clearly, is that we look at our size, and we're about in the middle compared to the agencies around here. 62,000 customers or accounts, puts us pretty square in the middle there. We started looking at what that means in terms of miles of pipeline, in terms of number of pump stations, in terms of number of tanks. And what it says is that we need more infrastructure here on a per capita basis than others do, right? Other similarly sized agencies. So, this, I think for those that can see the numbers here, I think they speak for themselves. I thought they looked better, more graphically. And so this is the same information in the prior slide. If you put it to a graph, and I think it's pretty clear, if you look at ourselves on the left-hand side, MMWD, each and every bar there, whether it's pipes per 1,000 customers or tanks for 10,000 or pumps for 10,000, each and every bar there from Marin is higher than every other one of our comparators, right? And some higher degrees than others, and there's a variety of reasons for those, but a long way of saying it requires more infrastructure here in Marin. We have less economies of scale with which to get the water from our water sources to the taps of our customers. And so that leads us into another challenge, right? The other challenge we have is a long-term planning challenge, right? How do we, within our rate structure, and not only do the day-to-day, but how do we also account for water supply and for maintaining this infrastructure that is can be out of sight and out of mind, but also very costly and very important. So the reason why we established a capital maintenance fee back in 2019, I'll talk more about that in a minute, but the reason why we established that is so that we had a dedicated funding source for debt service and for capital projects. Due to the current financial conditions we find ourselves in, we've used that CMF to dedicate it almost directly towards debt service, which means we've had to pull back on the amount of projects we can fund, right? So that's led to more critical infrastructure projects having been delayed. That's led to reduced spending for pipeline replacements, for watershed improvements, and for pump station upgrades. Now, with that, we're also doing our best to leverage, grants and loans for high priority projects, and there are monies at the state and federal government, and we're, like I said, doing our best to make sure we leverage those, especially for the bigger projects. Those don't always come in when you need them, and those don't always match perfectly with our exact needs, but we do have a great staff working towards that. But I think the final bullet there, and probably can't state that one clearly enough, is that design and construction costs for water supply enhancement projects, those have to be incorporated in our future planning, right? We can't just only fund for today or only fund for our kind of known infrastructure. We have to start funding for the design and construction costs for future water supply enhancement projects. And as I'll talk about later, we can't do that all overnight, but we can certainly start to get ourselves in the right direction through this upcoming rate cycle. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the challenges and opportunities section of today's presentation. So now I'm going to go a little bit more into the weeds on current rate structure. We'll talk about some elements of the proposed rate plan as we're considering it now, and we'll talk about how that proposal may impact customer bills. So I briefly mentioned Prop 218 earlier in terms of the unique aspects of California and the rules and regulations that we're under. And so this is just talking a little bit more in depth about that. So Prop 218 outlines the process by which all service fees charged by local governments in California are established. And so it's not just us as a utility, it's any government source that enacts a property fee. The gist of that is that at the end of the day, it requires a public hearing with written notice mailed to property owners and to tenants in advance. And so we will be holding that hearing later in the year, as you'll see in the next steps section. But that's the gist of it, is we need to make sure we're doing our analysis, and then we're engaging with the public and being very transparent about the rates that are needed to fund our system. The two basic provisions are in the middle. Rates cannot exceed the cost of providing service. So what that means is we can't make a profit off of it, right? We do need to plan for the long term and need to plan for reserves, but it's not a profit-making mechanism. It's just a kind of a planning tool and making sure that we can ascribe the rates that we're charging to our plans in the future. And the second part is a little bit more difficult, and it's obviously imperfect. It's a challenge, but it's a good challenge to have. And that is that our cost recovery methodology, which is basically our rate structure, it must be proportional to the customer base, right? We have to make sure we're assigning the costs proportionally to where the water is being used, and make sure that we're, having everyone doing their fair share of providing the funds it needs to maintain our community water system. And then finally, it's probably obvious at this point, but the rate structure for financial stability, it must be sufficient to fund operations, maintenance, capital, debt service. And with that is our bond covenants, right? We have debt service, and they've also given us, we've signed away in blood in many cases to say we will maintain a certain level of revenue and reserves to maintain that debt service. So that's what bond covenants means. And we do want to be fiscally responsible and build back our reserves for our own, uses anyway. And then, as I've mentioned a few times here, we need to make sure we're beginning to start to cover the costs of water supply enhancements. So this slide here, I have it in here. I shared this, I think, in early January. But what it is here is it's saying, we're not starting from scratch, right? We have a history here, over 100 years of history, in fact, at the district of running a water operation, and that's been funded by rates ever since the beginning. So, we're not starting from like I said, from scratch. So we looked at our rate increase history and what got us to where we are today, right? So over the past 30 years, our Marin water bills have increased by an average of 4% per year. That kind of lines up pretty tightly with that 4% increase in our operating expenses I showed earlier. And it's about common with inflation, right? Inflation was about 3% per year over that time, so pretty much in line with what you'd expect if you believe that rates should follow inflation, right? The next bullet down there says that AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association, they do a national survey periodically to say what's the industry doing in terms of rate increases, right? So they show that the average rate increase for the last 20 years has been 10% per year, and that basically equates to double the rate of inflation. So if you think that every other agency on average is increasing rates double the rate of inflation, but here at Marin, we're only raising the rates, on average by inflation, that we're probably falling behind industry standards in terms of maintaining our infrastructure, in terms of adapting to the times around us, and in terms of preparing for the future. So ideally, you'd like for rates to increase in a consistent and predictable manner. And that's both for us at the district. We'd like to have some level of certainty with our financial planning. And I would imagine, for customers, you don't want to be caught by surprise or have these, huge changes from year to year, right? I think we all appreciate predictability and consistency. As we look back at our history, due to weather and consumption, we've actually experienced large swings in the annual rate changes since the 90s. So namely, we've had 16 years with 0% increases, or in fact, one rate reduction. And then we've had 3 years with 10% or greater. So you're kind of getting that whipsaw, right? Where nothing and then big increases. During their period of 93 to 2007, as it says in the bottom there, we actually reduced rates by 25%. And then we held it flat for 11 of the next 14 years. So a lot of numbers there. I think when you look at it on the chart, you kind of see it more clearly. 1992 to 2022, there's a big part in the middle there, as the notes say, 14 times during 22 years where we held rates flat. And so, I think there's two ways to look at this, right? I think, there were times, and I think many of us remember those times, where I think that was the goal of the district, was to contain costs, was to manage to that. And I think that there was cost control, a philosophy, and we should be able to run our district more like a business. We should be able to be more efficient. And you can see, what that does in those early years. And I think there's, you can probably see a little bit of a change in that in the early 2000s, where we kind of got back on kind of a more steady pace of increasing rates every couple of years by about that inflationary impact. And then I think you see the last few years where you see some big spikes, right? 2016, 2020, those are largely driven by fixed fees. So we really started having to increase our fixed fees during those years. And I think for a couple of reasons, right? I think we started realizing that if you're not raising rates, for that long, you're probably falling behind on infrastructure. And you have, like I said, a few times, pretty old infrastructure, and we have to make progress there. And I think if you look at the demand patterns from quite a few slides ago, you'll see also that, we started having some years of droughts during those mid-2000, 2010s or so. So we had to catch up. I would also say that, the impact of increasing fees on the far right over there was actually a positive impact for our credit ratings, right? I think once we were able to establish with the credit rating agencies that we do have a plan and we are committed to kind of adjusting rates when we need to, they gave us an upgrade. We were upgraded in 2019, just following our CMF rate increase in 2019. And then I think a big part of that too was the fact that not only did we establish a fixed funding fee for our capital, which was a big liability of the district at the time, but that we put into place 4% per year after that, kind of a commitment to keep on raising rates at least by inflation. And so, like I said, credit rating agencies looked at that favorably, and that did help reduce the cost of borrowing for the district. So kind of backing that up, so that's our history. We've had ups and downs. And so that brings us to today, where we're at today. And so right now our customers pay for the water service through a blend of fixed fees and variable charges. On the fixed fee side, we have 3 fixed fees: our base water charge, our watershed management fee, and the capital maintenance fee. On the variable side, meaning depending on how much you use, you pay, we have what's called a tiered rate structure. And that basically means that as customers make their way up that tier, as you use more water, you actually pay a higher unit price as you kind of pass certain landmarks along the way there. We also, as examples for single family residential, those higher prices begin at 21 CCFs per month. I'll show you a graph of that here in a minute. And we also have a structure here where our residential customers receive additional units of low cost water in the summertime. So it's unique again to Marin. We have a lot of things that are unique about us. I could have put this on that slide too. Our rate structure is unique as compared to other agencies. But those 3 things in terms of our tiered rate structure, that we have the inclining blocks where you pay more as you use more, and those begin at 21 CCFs, and we also have that summer allocation. I would note that commercial and institutional customers have a different structure. Those are based on a percentage of the baseline units, because we do have such a wide variety of use within our commercial and institutional sectors, and that's been there as an overall kind of component of the rate structure for years. When you look at our rate tables, this is just kind of more, what am I talking about? I see all these words about tiers and summer allocations. So this is what it is, right? It's residential across the top there, slight difference between single family, duplex, and multifamily units, with the fixed fees across the bottom. But it's really just showing you that as you go higher in your usage, you're paying tier 1, 2, and 3 prices, which increase as you go up that scale. And there's a different metric between summer and winter in terms of how many units are provided within each pricing tier. So won't spend a lot of time on this, but if you're familiar with your rates or your bills, this is kind of what goes into it all. And I think over the next few slides, we'll probably switch back and forth between gallons and CCF. And so they're in the middle here, you can see the 1 CCF is 100 cubic feet, and that's roughly equal to 748 gallons as we make our way through these slides. Another aspect of our water sales here is that we're by far our largest customer base is our residential customers. Single family residential customers account for 60% of our water sales. If you add in the other residential sectors, multifamily and duplexes and whatnot, that's another 14 or 15%. So 75% of our water sales are generated through residential customers. And so I'm showing you this for information purposes, but also because the next couple of slides really kind of hone in on what the impact is on our largest segment, which is our residential customers. So this is a typical monthly expense right now on our current rate structure for water service for a residential customer, a single family residential customer. Typically speaking, on a monthly basis, our customers use about 5.5 CCFs or 4,100 gallons. And so that the variable, kind of the volumetric component that they pay is $26 a month. The 3 fixed fees are listed there: base water service fee, base water service charge, watershed management fee, and capital maintenance fee. They're all fixed fees, as you can see on the right-hand side: $22, $6, and $15. What does that all mean? It means that the average or the typical customer here, single-family residential, pays $69 a month for their water bill. I would note on the bottom there that water bills are typically issued on a bi-monthly basis here at the district. The reason why we convert this to monthly is because most other agencies bill monthly. Most of our other bills that come to us are on a monthly basis, so it kind of just helps that proportionality and kind of helps the understanding for where does water rates kind of fall into the overall mix of our monthly expenses. And so I've converted this to monthly just to kind of help make it a little bit more understandable for most of us who pay bills on a monthly basis. So one of the things, as we looked at the cost of service, I've showed you the rate increase history, is that our current rate structure and where we're at now have resulted essentially in an increased percentage of fixed fees, meaning that over the last couple of rate cycles, the typical amount that a customer pays in fixed fees has about doubled, as you can see here, right? It's gone from 34% back in 2015, it went up to about 50% in 16, 17, and 18. And then after this CMF was approved in 2019, a typical customer here in the district pays about 60, or as the slides say, 62%, 63% of their bills are paid on a fixed fee, meaning that regardless of how much water they use, they're going to pay the same 60% of their bill, each and every month. And I would also note, I guess while I'm on this slide, I would also note that that is typically higher than what we've seen in other agencies. As we're looking at, scanning around other water districts here in the Bay Area, we are on the high end of that, if not the highest, in terms of overall percentage of fixed fees garnered in each one of our bills. Okay, this slide here takes some getting used to. There's a lot going on here, and so I won't spend a lot of time on it, other than to say, this is how, when I look at it, when our rate consultants look at it, when we look at, how does our tiers work? And so you recall that I talked about, we have a tier structure where as you use more water, you have to pay a higher unit price, right? So tier structures are intended to be there for a couple of reasons. Number one, you want to make sure you're ascribing your lowest cost water to your lowest water users, right? We have various degrees of expense with how much money it costs us to produce water. And we want to make sure we're giving our lowest cost water to our lowest water users. So that's, first of all, we want to make sure we're doing that. Secondly, tier pricing is intended to have a bit of a conservation signal, right? You want to make sure that, where you can, from a cost, justified perspective, you're giving pricing signals. If you just had one price for every unit of water, then it wouldn't matter if you use 1 gallon or 1 million gallons. You kind of pay the same unit price, and there would be no difference. There'd be no incentive or disincentive along the scale there. So tiered pricing is common, and it's a pretty effective pricing signal, and it's a pretty effective incentive for customers to conserve. Unfortunately, as the charts show here, the red dotted line is where our tier 2 pricing begins, and so if you look at that going straight down, that's 21 CCFs. So the big part of the curve there to the left of that red, most of our customers, in fact, 75 to 80% of our customers are in tier 1, right? They never even experience the pricing signal of what happens when water gets more expensive, right? We're giving our lowest cost water to 80% of the users, which really limits the effectiveness of the pricing signal, and frankly limits the impact of our tier system overall. When you have 85% to the left of that curve, and it's a very smaller and smaller percentage as you go out to the right of that curve. So as noted on the bottom, half of our customers use less than 11 CCFs and 75% use less than 19 CCFs. And so again, what does that mean to this conversation? That means we need to look at our tiers, right? We need to probably change where our tiers are, so that we have a more kind of natural alignment. Maybe it's right in the middle there. Maybe it's something between our current price in the middle, but that's kind of what we're looking at with our rate consultants, is what's the most appropriate place to set that pricing signal between tier 1 and tier 2, and then as you go down the line for our tier 3 and tier 4 prices. So we're looking at that. The slide is meant to kind of convey the fact that our current tier structure does not accomplish the goal of sending the right price signals, nor does it accomplish the goal of giving our lowest cost water to our lowest water users. Okay. So focus areas, as we look at the rate structure, and again, we're kind of converting here down to brass tacks in terms of what happens when we start making changes to the overall cost structure. So our focus areas, as we embarked on this, and as we've been taking input from the board, as we've been taking input from the public, is these 3 areas, right? So number one, we want to update our rate model to reflect our current demand patterns and also to reflect our cost of service. And so that's largely what I talked about at the very beginning. Overall demand, where are the costs going? So the model has to effectively, pull in the revenue required to, fund the costs that we have to provide water service. So what does that mean for specifics? That means we need to look at the residential tier breaks to align it with our demand patterns. That was that curve I just showed you. That means we need to take a look at our fixed fees, because I think that, in terms of fixed fees, you also get that same conservation and pricing signal that if you're paying too high of a fixed fee, you're not going to necessarily, notice as much on the variable side. So fixed fees going to kind of work both ways there. And we've heard, I think, quite a bit of feedback from the public that fixed fees are out of line with some of our industry comparators, and that it'd be something to look into, at least to evaluate. Could we change the fixed fee and variable fee mix within our rate structure? So what that kind of means, a third bullet down, is that we probably are going to focus more on the volumetric side as we look to any enhancements, right? As we look to try to fix the budget and start making progress towards some of these funding opportunities, we're probably going to be thinking about how should those be more ascribed to the volumetric scale and not the fixed fee scale. And then finally, we've talked about it quite a few times, but I think drought rates are something we need to have in our overall rate model. We didn't have those for the last few years, and so not necessarily a huge structural change, but it will help us in the long term if we get into another drought cycle. We want to establish drought rates that are based on our district's water shortage contingency plan. So those are four structural elements we're looking at with our rate model. As the customers look at it and as we administer it, frankly, from our side, we also want to simplify it, right? We want to improve customer understanding, make sure they know, why they're getting charged and then what they can do about that. We want to give customers a greater control of their bill, and that speaks more to the fixed fee and variable fee, mix. We want to encourage conservation, right? We want to make sure there's pricing signals, appropriate and cost-based pricing signals, throughout the entire tier structure. And then part of that is we want to eliminate seasonal tiers for residential customers, because seasonal tiers, by giving more water in the summer, it doesn't mean our water is cheaper in the summer. It's just, kind of an oddity of the pricing structure. And I think it's not needed necessarily, because I think the tier system itself, should already kind of have a seasonality built in. And so to simplify it and to make it just more straightforward, we're looking at eliminating those seasonal tiers for residential customers. And then finally at the bottom, overarching, and it could have been on the top of the slide, but overarching, I think we want to take a long-term lens, right? Again, I've mentioned a few times in Ben's remarks, we've been a water district here for 100 years. I think we all expect to be a water district here for the next 100 years. And so you can't change something overnight, but you do want to start making the right steps in the right direction. So we want to take an incremental approach to change wherever possible. We also want to have a goal of more stable and predictable future rate increases, right? We don't want this big whipsaw up and down. We'd rather have stable and predictable, for all parties involved. And so those are some of the guiding principles we have as we look forward here to proposing a rate structure. Then the final elements of this, which is not at all a small element, is the revenue requirement. And so when we talk about the rate structure, you can't really talk about that without knowing what revenue you're shooting for, right? What is the district's revenue requirement? How much revenue do we have to pull in? So the first slide here talks about baseline. And again, I said at the beginning, baseline means how do we restore funding for the service levels that everyone is used to, that have been incorporated into the budget for the last 10 or 15 years. And again, that have not changed in the last 10 or 15 years, right? Staffing stayed the same, operations are basically the same. So this doesn't move the district forward in any direction. But what it would do is, if we plug that $30 million ongoing budgetary shortfall that's mentioned there, it is no small task by any means. But that would allow us to better reflect the demand patterns. We'd be able to adjust for some of the inflationary impacts that we have. And it would essentially, as the third kind of sub bullet says, it would keep us from continuing to lose $1 million a month, right? If you look back at some of the slides I've given before, water sales alone, not even counting other expenditure increases, but water sales alone, we're missing about 12 million a year. That translates to 1 million a month. And so every month that we don't change our rates and we don't restore that baseline, we're continuing to lose $1 million a month. And that's not a good position to be in over the long term, obviously. By fixing the baseline also, we'll be able to eliminate our hiring freeze, right? We'll actually be able to fill the positions that are approved in the current budget. We'll be able to get back to full staffing so that staff can get back to doing all the work that we do and kind of fulfilling the mission of the district. We'll be able to restore our capital improvement program to what it was pre-drought, to having a stable funding source and kind of predictable planning, so that we can actually have our engineers and our planning teams know what they have to work with and be able to make some longer term decisions and prioritize the projects we need to work on. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we have bond covenants, meaning that the debt service we took in years past, we've promised to our bond holders that we will maintain certain reserve levels and certain revenue levels to have our debt service covered. And so by fixing this $30 million ongoing shortfall, as it shows on the top there, we'll be able to maintain or adhere to those bond covenants. The next part of this is just as important, and I think just as significant to the rate requirement, and that is enhancements, right? And so the last slide was all baseline. How do we get back to where we were pre-drought, pre-COVID? This next set of items here is if we want to raise more revenue to actually fulfill many of the initiatives we've talked about here at the board and in the community. Those range from water supply projects. And again, there's a big range there because we're still, I think, deciding how and where to spend our money most wisely. But $2 to $9 million a year for short-term projects and for longer-term planning, that would be an enhancement, something that's not currently funded. How do we attack, or how do we start to strategize about really looking at the critical infrastructure needs, and the word critical there is because these are systematic, within our system, they're just huge infrastructure pieces that really impact many, many areas of our distribution system. So Smith Saddle Tanks, Pine Mountain Tunnel, the North Marin Line, and there's a reason why each of those are $20 million plus projects, right? They're huge. They're almost impossible to cash fund, right? So we need to find a strategy to be able to start, repairing and rehabilitating those and really modernizing them so that they can last us the next 100 years as opposed to just being relics of the last 100 years. That also goes with AMI. There's been much discussion here about AMI, not cheap, but obviously a very important tool for our customers and for the district. Seismic retrofits so we can make sure we're earthquake safe. And then the Ross Reservoir facility there too. So each of those has very high price tags, as you can see on the screen. And so those would be critical infrastructure needs that we would consider funding with rate revenues. And then finally, service level enhancements, right? And so that's really saying, staff increases or increased, commitments towards some of the goals and some of the targets we've established over the last few years. Those range from watershed protection and, wildfire preparedness to improved habitat restoration. And also just best practices, right? Here within the organization, we have some areas that we could certainly be more efficient with. So, adding staff in targeted areas to make us run more efficiently, to make us provide better service to our customers. And then so we can also fund, things that are more in line with industry best practices. So each of these on the screen here are kind of under this header of enhancements, right? They weren't in the last budget. They weren't funded by the last rate cycle, but they're things that I think, and rightfully so, we've been talking about here with the board and with the community over the last months and probably years that, if we have the opportunity, we'd like to explore these opportunities. So two main categories, baseline enhancements. And I'm calling those out because they make a big difference in the overall, rate proposal as we're about to see here. So this is, very preliminary, and I couldn't, preface that enough at this point in the overall process. But I think what I'd like to say at the beginning of this slide is that, typically what agencies do is they do all the work, cost of service analysis, with their consultants, they get a big report. And then because 218 requires you to hold a public hearing, and that's kind of the first time you start to see, what might happen to water rates, right? And by that time, you're kind of almost done. You can't really make any changes. As we started off on this process this year, I think we as a district decided that we would rather go out early, maybe before we're fully finished with the report, and engage with the community and make sure we're getting the proper feedback and make sure we're really being transparent about the process we're going through. And so the slide on the screen here is meant to do that. We're still a month or two away from finalizing our report. We have some major inputs as is shown here on the screen in terms of decisions to be made on overall revenue and some of the structural elements. But at this early stage, we would like to share with the board and with the community what that might mean, right? So there's 3 boxes here within each, and I'll kind of orient you to what the slides say here, and then I'll go through the numbers. The 3 kind of bars in front of you is the lowest one is for kind of our typical lower water users, in that 25th percentile range. The middle bars there is a median water use. I think I mentioned earlier that's around 11 CCFs a month, or if your average bill would be, as it shows here, $69. And then on the right-hand side of the screen would be the 75th percentile. And so that's not the highest water user, but it's certainly more than average, right? So these are 3 representative, I think 3 areas to represent for along that scale for, where do the costs impact a typical bill. And these are shown in monthly cost impacts, again, to make it a little bit more tangible for those of you that are used to paying monthly bills and every other one of your monthly bills. And so what this is saying is that the current, in the dark blue, that's what we're paying now. So current bills for low water users are around $57. Current monthly expense for a medium water user is about $69. And the current monthly expense is about $88 for the higher end of water users. The gray bars in the middle there, that shows what it would cost or what might be a rate structure or a rate impact for us to get back to baseline, right? So those are those things that plug in that $30 million hole, returning to full staffing, all those things I mentioned there, just getting back to what the budget was set at, pre-drought and pre-COVID. So the impact there would be $3 on the low water user per month, additional $10 on a medium water user per month, and $24 on a higher water user per month. If you kind of go to that expanded list of enhancements I mentioned, again, it's a pretty big jump, but if you get to that expanded list of enhancements, it's a bigger impact, as you can see, across the entire scale. So that would be in addition to the 3, the 10, and the 24 that I first mentioned, the enhancement options would look more like an additional $9 to a low water user, additional $20 to a middle water user, an additional $44 to someone who's on the higher end of water use. And again, those enhancements, as I mentioned a few times, those would cover things like water supply projects, infrastructure improvements, and namely large scale infrastructure improvements, and then service enhancements, right? To kind of add services to areas that are, identified by the district to be targeted areas we want to improve. So again, just to wrap this up, this is, 3 different looks at what might be a rate increase. Again, pending, another month or 2 of study and then pending getting feedback from the board and from the community. But these are the ranges we're looking at now, anywhere between, $3 and $9 to a low user and $24 and $44 increase to a high water user. Okay, so I think, rightfully so, one would ask, so what is the district doing, to have cost management, how are you managing costs, right? How are you containing costs? Why are you coming to us to ask for a rate increase? Why don't you just find ways to cut your own budget and to cut your own costs? And so I think, as I mentioned a few times, we've been doing that, right? I think we all are always taking that eye to how we can contain costs, what we can do to help out the bottom line, how we can improve efficiencies. And so in the current year, which is shown on the top there, while we're facing this pretty significant operating shortfall, we do have a hiring freeze in place for most positions, and it's not all positions. We're kind of treating them case by case, and certainly critical positions are moving forward. But where we can, we're waiting. We're holding off and not using reserves to fill positions. Similarly, we're reducing capital spending. We haven't reduced it to 0. Critical projects still go forward. We're still working on capital improvements, but we've had to pull back a lot in order to maintain our debt service payments, in order to minimize the use of reserves there. And then we've also delayed equipment replacements. And it's a little bit different than infrastructure, but we have quite a bit of equipment here that's also getting old, and those are kind of easy delays and deferrals, but they start to add up over time. And so those are the 3 kind of main big cost savings we have in the current year budget. Ongoing, and this could be forward looking and backward looking, kind of both ways. Their district is always looking for ways to contain costs, and so here's a couple examples for ways that we're either reducing costs and or improving our efficiencies. Number 1, we refinanced our bonds back in 2020 to take advantage of a low rate environment while we had it, and that reduced our annual debt service by about $500,000. We're constantly leveraging grant opportunities, so knowing that there are funds out there at the state and federal level, and really just trying to make sure that our projects can align well with the funding opportunities that are there. Wherever we can, we're trying to go after those type of grant opportunities. When we do invest in projects, we're trying to prioritize those that improve efficiency. So the Castania pump station, I showed a picture of that at the beginning, but that really helps us be a lot more efficient with how much water we can pull from Sonoma and the efficacy with which we get it into our system. We also, I showed the picture of the emergency generator at the beginning as well. So that helps us not only minimize electricity costs, during outages, but helps us keep the pumps going, at all times. And so there's that kind of sense of, peace of mind, knowing that we'll always have our generators going out there. We won't lose power to critical facilities. Over the last couple of years, we used reserves. So when we had the drought and we other agencies implemented drought rates and scrambled to increase charges on the customers, we instead chose to use our reserves in lieu of raising rates during the middle of COVID and during the middle of some economic uncertainty. And so that also helped customers, kind of not have to pay the bill up front, right? And then as I showed kind of in the historical staffing, we've held staffing levels flat since 2014, and that was following a 7% reduction in 2012. We've also limited our staff salaries in terms of overall annual COLAs or annual cost of living adjustments. Those have been held by contract to a CPI inflator that has been less than 3% since 2011 by contract. And so those are just examples of how the district is maintaining kind of an eye towards controlling costs in the short term and over the long term. And then when that's not possible, I think the other thing that we do is we have discount programs, right? So we know that, as water bills goes up, and we're not the only, area that people are seeing inflation, right? I think all of us are getting, other examples, whether it's the grocery store or other bills that we get of costs that are rising. So we're very aware of the fact that we're just one of many bills coming to our customers. And so we do have a pretty robust discount program available for customers to qualify. And the 3 primary programs are shown on your screen here. The biggest one in terms of what we're talking about today is our waiver based on income. So for low income households, We waive all fixed fees for anybody who qualifies, and that currently covers about 1,000 of our customers. We also have a program that's pretty unique in the sense that if you have a legitimate medical reason where you need to use more water, we'll waive certain fees and actually give you, more of our cheaper water at the low tier rates. And we have 400 customers enrolled there. And then a few years ago, we established what's called a Super Saver program. So to further incentivize conservation, we established an automatic program where if you are one of the 5% of the lowest water users in the district, you get an automatic discount on every bill of yours. And so by formula, that impacts 3,000 customers. So these are three kind of, high level, overviews of our customer discount programs. We've had some questions in the past few weeks about, how does our waiver program, our income waiver program compare to those around us? And I think this next slide will show that it actually compares very favorably. We have a pretty generous program at the least, I think here. Again, this is not required by anyone to be ahead of the pack here. I think we've just generally known that we want to make sure we're taking care of our low income customers. And so we offer a generous, low income program, much more generous than all of our regional comparisons, as it says here. Not only do we have higher income limits, meaning that we allow customers to qualify with higher incomes. I mean, Marin is a expensive place to live, and many of us, in terms of median income, would not qualify in other areas because of the scales they use. And so we have a higher kind of minimum threshold. We also have a higher benefit level, meaning that we provide a higher discount to our customers than do other agencies. And so a sampling here is shown on the screen, comparing us to East Bay Mud, Alameda County, Contra Costa Water, Santa Rosa, and North Marin Water. And again, you can see where, for a Marin Water, for a household of one, you'd qualify if you make under $83,000. Other agencies, it's much closer to $50,000. And Marin Water, if you're a family of four, you'd qualify for our discount programs if you're under $119,000, whereas other agencies, you'd have to be under $70,000 and in some cases lower. And then the benefit level, we waive all of our fixed fees, once you qualify. And you can see in other areas, it's less beneficial, right? 50% of fixed fees or a nominal credit of $40. And the range is all the way down to $15 true credit. So again, I think we can all, look at this, and I think it's something to be proud of in terms of the history of Marin. I think it's something that's appropriate to have in place, especially in times like this, as we're talking about raising rates on many people that are feeling cost pressures in many other areas of their life. And so just wanted to remind the board and public that these are in place and have been for a while. And so that leads me to the end of my presentation here, and I'll just wrap it up here in a few slides, but kind of to recap, again, $30 million operating shortfall is primarily due to reduced consumption, and that's a way of saying our rate structure doesn't really match the consumption patterns that we're seeing. We're also trying to account for inflationary pressures and making sure we're doing our best to replenish our reserves. We do want to make sure we're making progress towards water supply projects, and so those would be under that enhancement model. But water supply projects and service enhancements would require more funding, and that's going to cover both short-term tangible projects as well as longer-term planning efforts. Capital investments, again, have been a priority, continue to be a priority. Will continue to be priorities here, but it's a matter of kind of providing the investment levels to catch up to deferred maintenance, and or potentially using bond funding to kind of bridge the gap a little bit there. I talked about rate structure quite a bit. That's there. Again, we're working to find the right kind of mix of fixed fees and tier breaks and whatnot to really strike the right balance for our customers with kind of not the elephant in the room, but kind of that metric I put there at the bottom, that we're losing $1 million a month under the current rate structures. We've got to make a change somewhere. And then finally, future uncertainties. Again, none of us have a crystal ball, as I mentioned a few times. And so it's nice to know that we can't just solve the problem for today. We've got to think about a longer term lens. Climate change, drought, inflation, could be any other future uncertainties that we'd like to be able to say as a water district that we can withstand those, that we can have the reserves and have the structure in place to be able to still provide service during those times, regardless of what it may be. And so that's kind of a rate setting recap on what we're looking at. How can the public make sure that they're staying abreast of what we're doing? Well, we've got a website built out just for our 2023 rate setting process, marinwater.org/2023 rate setting. Not only is there links to understand your current bill, so you can kind of see where in the spectrum you may be impacted by the potential rate increases. There's also other links to prior studies, and we'll have a rate calculator up once we have a model here for it, and really a lot of good information about why you're getting the bill you're getting and what you can do about it to help lower your bill. Additional resources, as we'll mention here, we're starting customer workshops this week. And so the slides that you're seeing here are a large part of what you'll see at the customer workshops. We will add, some other speakers and some other details for the customer workshops, but those begin Thursday in Mill Valley, as it's shown on the right there, for Thursday, February 9th at 6 o'clock in Mill Valley. We'll continue the customer workshops next week, Monday, Wednesday, in person in Corte Madera and in San Rafael. And then on Thursday, for those of you that cannot make one of the in-person workshops, we'll do a virtual meeting. So we'll do a Zoom meeting on Thursday. And so you can get the information at marinwater.org. The same information will be presented at each workshop. So apologies to those who have to attend more than one. I have to hear me say this more than once, but we are going to do the same presentation at each workshop just to make sure that each customer has a chance to hear it from start to beginning. And not everyone we know attends board meetings here. And so we will record them as well. And so those will be placed online for anybody who wants to watch them in the future. Next steps, as I just mentioned, customer workshops. We're continuing to work hard every day, kind of refining the rate model that we have and getting feedback from the board and from the public. So we'll keep doing board meetings, customer workshops, and we'll continue to communicate via digital and print resources. And then the Prop 218 notice, as required by law, will go out, ideally sometime in March. And so customers can expect to see those in their mailboxes in March. We're planning for a public hearing sometime in May to really kind of round out our proposal and make sure that everyone has all the facts. And then finally, we're shooting for a July 1st implementation date for the new rates. And so that, I believe, takes me to the end, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over either to Ben, if you have any comments you'd like to put in here, or to the board. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Brett, I don't have any comments. I think we'll turn it over to President Schmidt.
Okay, thank you. Wow, Brett, thank you so much to you and to all the staff who pulled all this information together. I know this has been an incredible amount of work. And I really appreciate, while that was, I know there's a lot of information there. It might be a little overwhelming. Some folks might benefit from seeing it a second time. I think that it does a really good job at explaining the situation that we're in and the roadmap that we're trying to develop to put us on the very sound footing that we want to be on financially, so that we can afford to be investing in the kind of water supply solutions that build resiliency, which is we are very aware that we need to invest in, and I think that our customers want to see us invest in, and to also address the many needs that our aging infrastructure need to be addressed. So thank you for pulling all that together. All right, other board member comments?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'd like to say thank you, Brett. You did a great job of summarizing the condition that we're in and the efforts we're trying to make to stabilize the rate structure of the district. I'd also like to indicate that me and the previous board focused on affordability of water and of keeping the district as solvent as possible. And that I look forward to working with you and the rest of the board on the future of keeping this municipal water system running.
Other board members?
Yeah,
Matt, you're
thanks.
muted. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ranjit.
Thanks, Monty. And my thanks as well to Brett for a tour de force. That was impressive. Thank you. Brett, maybe a comment that I'd like us to keep in mind as we think about how to apportion the new revenues that we're looking at with the rate increase between the different key areas that you identified that require additional spending. And I want to start that by just reflecting on the slide you showed that indicated that our rates are rising at about 4% a year on average over the last 20 years, well below the industry standard, I think, which you said is about double CPI, where we are just about at CPI. And I think for an average customer, the question might be, why is it necessary to be spending so much more than the CPI or increasing our rates faster than CPI? And I would argue that one of those drivers is the constant need of water suppliers to be exploring and investing in new water sources, new water resources to ensure stability and resilience. And Marin water is a little bit unique in that we have not had that same emphasis on investing in new water resources that is characteristic for so many of our sister agencies. And of course, that puts us in this condition of vulnerability that you've been describing that needs to be addressed financially. So when we think about how we apportion different revenues, you've emphasized replenishing reserves to remain prepared for future uncertainty. I hope we'll think about how we can invest in reducing future uncertainty. Now, I know that replenishing reserves is not, we have to do that. It's not an option not to replenish our reserves for not just the very practical aspects of dealing with revenue shortfalls, but also, as you said, to maintain our credit ratings, to address our bond covenants. But I'd like to think about our rate of replenishment and how that might be managed so that we're ensuring commensurate investments in reducing our future uncertainty, both by establishing new water supplies, by addressing some of the catastrophic risks like wildfire that could be addressed with watershed management. So I hope we consider that carefully in this process. And then specifically, you indicated about we're looking at about $2 to $9 million annually for addressing new water supply development, short-term planning for long-term. Now, if we're looking at that, and we've discussed this in the past, as cash spending, about $2 to $9 million, that's very different from using that to pay off, to pay debt, to pay debt. So it'd be good to have a clarification there on whether the intent is to use that $2 to $9 million as cash, or to use it to support debt that would obviously give us much more room for supply development, even in a near term, shorter term than we might imagine. I think those are my main comments right now. Thanks a lot.
Other board members?
Matt, you want to go? I got one quick thing. Yeah. You're
You're muted, Matt.
I'm sorry about that. Jed, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and go. Brad, and continue with the theme of everybody else, thank you very much. The presentation was very helpful and very understandable too. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that you did, I think, a good job of explaining as well. But for the customers, we talked about under the revenue requirement, both baseline and enhancements, and you used the word opportunities to strengthen the organization. And I really think that opportunities is correct, but it should also include mandates, because we do have mandates to strengthen organization, particularly with water supply, and making sure that what we have right now continues to do the job it's doing and has done for the past 100 years to make sure we deliver the water. And we really need to be able to focus on that right now. And also understand that operationally, what we've been doing is unsustainable in a changing climate, both figuratively and literally, with the number of employees, the reduction in capital infrastructure investment. And so these are really imperative moves for us to get back on track. But in that same vein, I also like to let the public know, especially the folks that have been doing so well on conservation and doing their part to make sure that we did not run out of water, that one, we appreciate your actions, and we are doing everything we can to make sure that the low water users do not feel as big of a brunt as possible, all within the constraints of course, the 218 process. But we hear what you're saying. You save more water, why should we be paying more? We want to try to protect that as much as possible. So thank you again for the presentation. That's it, President Schmidt.
Jed?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Brent and team, I am super appreciative of the hard work that you guys have put into this. I mean, this is beyond hard work. I know you've been working weekends and nights, and I'm particularly appreciative of your response to our feedback recently, putting in details about the infrastructure spending needs. Your organization of the presentation was outstanding, and I just want to commend you. I know you put in a lot of work in this, and thank you, Ben. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, team, for all the hard work you did on it. I want to say to the public that that we have a unique opportunity at Marin Water right now, that in the face of drought, we must step up as a community together and make a difference. The demands of this important agency are significant. The infrastructure needs are vast. We must dig out of this deficit, and now is the time to invest in our future. This decision should not be about survival, but about striving to be the best of kind, a leader organization. Our customers have dreams of preserving our beautiful, sensitive habitat and thoughtfully managing our trails. We must invest in demand reduction efforts and augmenting our water supply and storage. We must rehire our short-staffed agency and replace our aging pipes. We must save for the future and for ourselves for generations. I'm proud of this agency. I'm proud to be associated with Marin Municipal Water District. I'm proud of our conservation efforts, our demand reduction ethos, and I'm proud of the programs for lower income and underserved populations. We must stand together as a community now. I have the utmost confidence in this highly engaged board, this terrific professional leadership team who I've got to know well over the last few months, and our outstanding dedicated staff. In 4 years, I hope that we can look back at these important decisions that we face now and view Marin Water with pride.
Thanks, Jed. Well said. Okay, with that, let's open it. If there are no other board comments, let's open it up to public comment.
We have so far 4 individuals waiting to speak. Numbers 1402 and then Phil Sauter. So go ahead, 1402.
James Holmes Larkspur. On the one hand, I understand the logic that the less water the district sells, the less revenue it collects to cover its costs that don't decrease with decreased sales. On the other hand, the district needs to understand just how cruelly ironic that logic is from the standpoint of the ratepayer. The less water we use, the more money we pay. Worse still, ratepayers are being penalized for heeding the district's call to conserve. That is the ultimate folly and fallacy of conservation. The more that we consumers do what the district wants us to do, the more the district will do to hurt us. Until the district finds a way to escape from that cruel conundrum, the less confidence in the district we ratepayers will have, and the less appealing that conservation policies will be. I don't have the whole answer to that conundrum, but one part of the answer is to expand local supply so that we are paying for more supply, not for less use. Another part of the answer has to be to decrease district spending on functions not necessary for water supply and distribution. In that regard, tomorrow night, the district is holding yet another public workshop on watershed recreation policy. Again, we will hear demands that the district act like a regional recreation district, but paid for with local water rates. As part of this rate-making process, we need to know how much recreation is costing us, how much more that increased recreation will cost, and as long as the district is raising rates, it should consider reducing recreation costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Phil Sauter, please.
Last week, Carrie and Paul kindly sent me some usage data, which keeps turning up useful insights. One is that we currently sell about 81% of our water in Tier 1, 13% in Tier 2, 5% in tier 3, and less than 2% in tier 4. I was surprised by how little is sold in the upper tiers at higher rates. And perhaps our success in demand reduction has left very few folks paying the higher rates. And it suggests why these higher priced tiers have such little impact on those who pay them. Hardly any water is used in these tiers, and the dollars just aren't that large. And that got me wondering what would happen if, instead of increasing rates per gallon, we merely adjusted the tier levels. Right now, a single residence can use 300 gallons a day and still pay tier 1 rates. That seems like a lot of water to still be paying the district's lowest rate per gallon. From there, I did a quick spreadsheet to see what would happen if, instead of 81%, we revised tier levels so that only 70% of our water was sold in tier 1, 15% in tier 2, 10% in tier 3, and 5% in tier 4. If my calculations are right, that would add $8 to $10 million annually to residential water sales revenue. Then I looked at what would happen if we adjusted tier levels so we sold 50% of our water in tier 1, 25% in tier 2, 15% in tier 3, and 10% in tier 4. And I believe that would add around $20 million annually to revenue from residential customers. Of course, these numbers might go down somewhat if these new tier levels actually did cause some heavy users to conserve, but that would be a good thing in terms of proactively managing demand. And it's important to note that if 50 to 70% of our water were sold in tier 1, the majority of our customers would remain in tier 1 and would not feel an increase at all. So I'll suggest that looking at adjusting tier levels as a way to substantially increase revenue without changing rates and without impacting most district customers. Ben said in last night's excellent water supply workshop that staff is looking at adjusting tier levels, and this is maybe old news to some of you. Certainly tonight, I've learned that Brett's all over it. But I wanted to put some numbers around the potential of this alternative to a rate increase. Finally, if we choose a path that increases water revenue at the higher end of this range, we could build reserves and pay down some of our debt, which has been hanging around the necks of all district customers, no matter how much water we try to conserve. There might also be room to invest in more high-impact conservation measures and possibly consider rebates for a larger number of customers who do conserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sauter. And the next two, Mr. Roger Roberts and Larry Minikes. Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to applaud this presentation. It is superb, and it has informed the public. If anybody watches this, it informs the public in a way that has never been done before. And I want to thank you for exposing the realities of this water district and its problems with lack of economies of scale and foregone investments that has led to today's issues and problems in its finances. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would like to add one additional comment that might be useful as an added point to make in the presentations to the public in the future. I've done a compound analysis of interest rate of interest costs per year over a next 10-year period. And if you look at that compound impact of anywhere between 3% and 5% a year increase in cost of operations and investment, you save $40 to $50 million by investing now rather than waiting and investing at a later date. So there's a substantial savings in doing it now because you know that it's going to cost you $40 or $50 million more over time if you delay those investments and meet those costs. I think that's an important point to make, and you may want to add that to your presentation. Again, thank you. I think you're on the right track. And I think the rate structures can be substantially improved. And Phil's suggestions make a lot of sense for consideration as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Larry Minikes, please.
And Brett, I want to second all the work that you and Steph have put into this. It's clear that this was a tremendous effort, and it very much is going to help going forward. I second all the remarks that were made tonight, particularly Roger's comments a few seconds ago, and just want to focus on one thing, which is your focus areas and the goal of a stable and predictable future rate increases, which is really going to make board life, staff life, and community life much easier when this is enacted. And that's really going to be one of the keys here, is that people are going to know where our rates are going to be year after year after year. And that's key. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Minikes. President Schmidt, we have two more speakers. Gary Dennison and Ed Jamison. Go ahead, Mr. Dennison.
Yeah, thank you. I just had one comment, both a challenge and an opportunity. As you know, we got like something like 10,000 homes that are supposed to be built in Marin over the next 10 years. And I don't know, like I said, that's a challenge and an opportunity in of itself. Opportunity from a revenue standpoint, but a challenge of how we're going to deliver all the water to those 10,000 homes. So I'm just saying, throwing that out, is that's probably something that should be considered in your presentation and your future planning. So that's all I had to say. Thank you. Great presentation, by the way.
And Mr. Ed Jamison.
Thanks. This was yet another really outstanding presentation tonight. I'd like to emphasize that we've only raised rates by about 4% annually, well below the industry average of about 10%, that likely more realistically met the replacement needs of their aging infrastructure. And I believe it's important that our customers need to be aware of this. I do not agree with possibly eliminating the summer high volume for the tier levels, which I believe is sensible. Other than that, I think your proposal for near tiers on page 48 looked about right. And importantly, I'd like to thank MMWD's management team. You have very significant challenges, but you're an impressively capable organization. I believe General Manager Horenstein has done an exceptional job of managing through a very difficult set of challenges. And I particularly want to acknowledge his steady, capable hand. MMWD is an organization I believe we ratepayers should have confidence in as it works through this rate setting process with the board. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jamison. I have no further speakers.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for all the thoughtful comments from folks. Really, there's, I really have to respect and appreciate all the time that people are putting in outside of these meetings, and including attending these meetings, to do their own analyses. We really appreciate that kind of creativity and commitment. Thank you. Okay, with that, our last agenda item, future meeting schedule and agenda items.
Yes, this is an informational item on the future meeting schedule and agenda items. Letting the board know that next week you'll have 3 meetings. The first one is next Tuesday, the 14th, is a special board of directors meetings. I believe it's, if I'm not mistaken, regarding the strategic water supply assessment. Then on the following day, we'll have the communications and water efficiency.
Or is that Tuesday one at 5 p.m.? Is that what I see?
That is correct.
Is there a reason it's not 6:30?
No, it was supposed to be 5 p.m.
Okay, I mean, it's fine. It's just, okay.
Okay. Then the following day after that that special board meeting is the communications and water efficiency meeting at 9:30 in the morning. Then on Friday, we'll have the operations committee meeting also at 9:30. And the following week is the board of directors regular bi-monthly meeting at 6:30, and that is virtual. All of these meetings are virtual. In terms of external meetings, the only one that I have so far that we have, or the board has, is the North Bay Water Reuse Authority. There is a board meeting on Monday, February 27th at 9:30 a.m. And I don't have any items regarding agenda items, and that concludes my staff report.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. Okay, with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good night, folks.
Good night, everybody.